When your detachment begins, it immediately disrupts the emotional expectations she has long relied on. Though she may not recognize it at first, she's become accustomed to your presence, your attention, and your responsiveness in ways that have quietly shaped her emotional landscape. It was never about grand gestures or constant validation. It was about consistency, reliability, and the subtle reassurance that she mattered. When you remove yourself, even partially, that rhythm is broken. The void left behind is not filled with drama or anger initially, but with an unsettling sense of imbalance. She feels it as a subtle tension, a space that refuses to be ignored, a missing piece that her mind instinctively seeks to understand. She begins to notice the absence in everyday moments. Things that once felt comfortable now feel heavy. Conversations, interactions, and routines that included you feel incomplete or hollow. The pattern she depended on, the implicit cues, the quiet support, the predictable reactions, are no longer there. Detachment exposes the structure that once underpinned her emotional security. Without it, she is forced to confront how much she relied on you not as a source of weakness, but as a stabilizing force in her life. That realization does not arrive gently, it creeps in, seeping into her awareness, tugging at her subconscious until it demands acknowledgement. Her mind starts replaying the familiar scenarios with a new lens. She recalls times when she expected a certain reaction and received it, taking it for granted, unaware that your presence required choice and effort. Now, when those reactions are absent, she experiences disorientation. What she once considered normal and reliable now feels fleeting, uncertain, and suddenly precious. This shift ignites curiosity and introspection as she seeks to understand why the emotional equilibrium has been disrupted. Your detachment acts like a mirror, reflecting back the importance of what she never fully appreciated. The absence of your engagement also challenges her assumptions about influence and control. She may have unconsciously believed that she could predict, manage, or manipulate the emotional flow between you. Your detachment dismantles that belief. Without reactive signals or responsive behavior, she realizes she cannot command your attention, cannot compel your presence, and cannot rely on her prior strategies to maintain emotional closeness. This realization is profoundly destabilizing as it confronts her with the fact that true connection is earned, not assumed, and that your presence was a choice, not a guarantee. This disruption further intensifies her emotional state because the mind naturally seeks resolution. When patterns are broken, when expectations are unmet, and when familiar sources of comfort vanish, the human brain struggles to adapt immediately. She experiences tension, longing, and even anxiety as she attempts to reconcile her internalized expectations with the reality of your detachment. She begins to scrutinize past interactions, analyze her own behavior, and question whether she underestimated your value. In this way, your detachment subtly catalyzes self-reflection and awareness, compelling her to confront truths she may have ignored while you were present. Over time, the initial discomfort evolves into deeper recognition. She begins to see that your detachment was never cruel or careless, it was deliberate, disciplined, and grounded in your own self-mastery. It is a demonstration of emotional strength, a refusal to be drawn into unnecessary reaction, and a way to maintain personal integrity. She notices that your absence is not emptiness, but a space in which she is forced to reflect, reassess, and understand the significance of your presence in a way she never could when you were constantly available. It is in the void created by your detachment that she begins to truly see the emotional stability and value you once provided, a clarity she can no longer ignore. As your detachment settles in, something deeper than confusion begins to surface within her, the sudden shock of realizing how emotionally dependent she had become without ever admitting it to herself. While you were present, your attention, calm energy, and quiet consistency blended so seamlessly into her life that she stopped noticing how much she leaned on it. It wasn't dramatic dependence or obvious neediness. It was subtle, comfortable, and unconscious. You were the emotional ground beneath her feet, steady and reliable, and because it was always there, she never questioned what would happen if it disappeared. When that support is withdrawn, even silently, the impact is immediate. She feels unsteady, not because you were controlling her emotions, but because your presence anchored them. Your detachment exposes the difference between independence and reliance. She begins to notice emotional fluctuations she didn't experience before: restlessness, overthinking, unease. Situations that once felt manageable now feel heavier, and she can't quite understand why. This discomfort isn't about missing conversation or companionship, it's about the absence of emotional regulation she subconsciously outsourced to you. Her mind begins to search for substitutes, distractions, or validation elsewhere, but nothing replicates what you provided. Other voices feel hollow, attention feels noisy, and interactions lack depth. This contrast sharpens her awareness. She starts to understand that what she depended on wasn't just your presence, but your emotional maturity, your restraint, your steadiness, your ability to remain grounded regardless of circumstances. Without it, she feels exposed to her own emotional volatility in a way she hasn't felt in a long time. This realization often arrives with resistance. The ego dislikes admitting dependence, especially when it believed itself to be in control. She may initially frame her discomfort as boredom, irritation, or dissatisfaction with external circumstances. But beneath those surface emotions lies a growing truth. She leaned on your emotional strength more than she ever acknowledged. Your calm absorbed her chaos. Your certainty softened her doubts. Your silence stabilized moments where her thoughts would have otherwise spiraled. Without that stabilizing force, she is left confronting her emotions directly, without a buffer. As this awareness deepens, vulnerability emerges. She becomes more sensitive to emotional triggers, more reactive to uncertainty, more prone to overanalyzing small things. The emotional equilibrium she once enjoyed is gone, and she doesn't know how to recreate it alone. This is where the shock intensifies. She begins to realize that emotional independence isn't the same as emotional isolation, and that true strength often comes from recognizing and valuing the stability others bring into our lives. Your abs. NCE highlights that lesson with uncomfortable clarity. At this stage, memories resurface with new meaning. Moments where you listened without judgment, remained composed under pressure, or offered reassurance without demand now feel significant. She recognizes that your presence allowed her to feel safe without effort, calm without struggle. Losing that safety forces her to confront her own emotional gaps. This is not weakness, it is awareness, but awareness often feels like pain before it feels like growth. The shock of emotional dependence shakes her self-perception, forcing her to reassess how much she truly valued what you gave. Over time, this realization evolves into respect. She begins to see that emotional stability is rare, and that she may have mistaken your consistency for something ordinary simply because it was always there. Your detachment doesn't punish her, it educates her. It reveals the quiet strength she leaned on, the balance she benefited from, and the emotional maturity she may have underestimated. Whether she chooses growth or remains stuck in regret is beyond your control, but the realization itself is unavoidable. It is through the shock of losing your emotional steadiness that she finally understands how deeply she depended on the strength you carried so effortlessly. As the emotional noise settles and your detachment remains steady, something unavoidable rises to the surface within her. Emotional turmoil mixed with regret and forced self-reflection. This stage is not loud or dramatic at first. It begins quietly in moments when she is alone with her thoughts, when distractions fail, and when silence becomes impossible to escape. Your absence no longer feels like confusion or shock. It becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, she starts seeing parts of herself she avoided confronting while you were present. Without your emotional To soften reality, she begins replaying past interactions in her mind. Words she once dismissed return with weight. Moments where she chose pride over understanding, comfort over effort, or control over connection suddenly feel different. She starts asking questions she never needed to ask before. Was I fair? Did I listen? Did I value what was right in front of me? These questions do not arise because you demanded answers, but because your silence leaves no distractions to hide behind. Reflection becomes unavoidable when there is nothing left to react to. Regret enters subtly. It is not immediate sorrow or dramatic remorse. It is a quiet recognition of missed opportunities. She realizes that your consistency was not weakness, that your patience was not obligation, and that your restraint was not indifference. What she once saw as guaranteed now appears fragile and rare. This realization destabilizes her emotional certainty. The confidence she had in her decisions begins to waver, not because she wants to undo the past, but because she finally understands the cost of her choices. This emotional reckoning often clashes with her ego. Pride resists accountability, and self-reflection threatens the narrative she built to justify her behavior. She may attempt to rationalize her actions, telling herself that things happened as they had to, or that you were replaceable, or that she lost nothing significant. But these explanations weaken with time. Your continued detachment contradicts them. If you are truly insignificant, why does your absence weigh so heavily? If her choices were flawless, why does regret keep resurfacing in quiet moments? The tension between ego and truth intensifies her emotional turmoil. She feels conflicted. Part of her wants to preserve her self-image, while another part recognizes that mistakes were made. This internal conflict is exhausting. It drains emotional energy, disrupts peace of mind, and creates restlessness. She may feel irritable, nostalgic, or unusually sensitive, not because of external events, but because her inner world is undergoing a recalibration. Your detachment acts as a catalyst, forcing emotional honesty without confrontation or accusation. As self-reflection deepens, she begins to see patterns, not just in the relationship, but in herself. She recognizes how comfort bred complacency, how certainty reduced appreciation, and how pride prevented vulnerability. This awareness is painful, but it is also clarifying. She starts to understand that emotional connection requires presence, effort, and humility, not assumptions. The breakdown is not caused by your absence alone, but by the realization that she failed to protect something valuable when she had the chance. Over time, regret transforms into a form of respect. She begins to see that your detachment was not an act of punishment or manipulation, but a boundary, a quiet assertion of self-worth. That understanding lingers long after the emotional turbulence subsides. Even if she never voices it, the lesson remains etched into her perception. That true value is often revealed only after it is lost, and that pride carries a price when it replaces appreciation. It is in this silent reckoning, fueled by regret and reflection, that she finally understands what your presence truly meant and why its absence feels so heavy. As your detachment continues and no emotional signals come from you, her mind enters a restless state where it begins scrambling to reassess your value. What once felt familiar, predictable, and easily categorized suddenly becomes uncertain. The absence of feedback forces her thoughts inward. When there is no reaction to interpret, no reassurance to lean on, and no resistance to push against, the mind does what it does be. It replays the past, and in that replay, your role begins to change. She starts revisiting moments she once overlooked, small gestures, quiet consistency, the way you stayed composed when situations were tense, the way you listened without needing to dominate the conversation. All of it begins to resurface. These memories don't arrive nostalgically at first, they arrive analytically. Her mind is trying to solve a problem. Why does his absence feel heavier than expected? To answer that, she must reevaluate what you actually brought into her life. And in doing so, she realizes she may have underestimated your significance. When you were present, your value blended into the background of her life. Familiarity made it invisible. The human mind often misjudges what is consistent as replaceable, but now, without your presence, she compares. Other interactions feel louder but emptier, more stimulating but less grounding. Conversations lack depth. Attention feels transactional. Stability feels rare. This contrast sharpens her perception. She begins to recognize that your value was never about excitement or validation. It was about balance, emotional safety, and quiet strength. Her reassessment also challenges the story she told herself about you. She may have believed you would always be there, that your role was fixed, or that you needed her more than she needed you. Your detachment dismantles that narrative. If you can walk away calmly, if you can remain grounded without seeking reassurance, then perhaps you were never as dependent as she assumed. That realization forces her to reframe how she saw you, not as someone predictable, but as someone self-directed and strong. As this mental shift deepens, respect begins to form alongside longing. She starts to see that your restraint was discipline, not passivity, that your silence was self-control, not indifference, that our consistency was a choice, not an obligation. These distinctions matter because they transform how she perceives your worth. The mind places greater value on what requires effort, self-mastery, and emotional maturity. And now, stripped of familiarity, those qualities stand out clearly. This reassessment is not comfortable. It destabilizes her confidence in her past judgments. She may question why she didn't see these qualities sooner, why she focused on what was missing instead of what was present. The mind resists admitting misjudgment, but your continued detachment leaves no room for denial. If you were truly insignificant, your absence would not provoke such persistent thought. The very fact that she is rethinking you is proof that your value is deeper than she acknowledged. Over time, this mental reevaluation becomes internalized, even if she never reaches out. Even if circumstances prevent reconnection, the shift remains. Her standards subtly change. She becomes more aware of emotional substance, more sensitive to stability, more cautious about dismissing consistency as boring or guaranteed. Your absence educates her perception. You become a reference point, a silent benchmark for what real presence feels like. It is through this quiet mental reckoning that she finally understands your true value, not because you demanded recognition, but because your absence made it undeniable. As your detachment remains steady and unreactive, a deeper layer of her emotional breakdown begins to surface, the realization that she has lost control over the dynamics she once believed she managed effortlessly. This loss of control is not about dominance or manipulation in an obvious sense. It is about predictability. She once understood how the emotional exchange worked. She knew what would get a response, what would spark reassurance, what would bring you closer again. Your Attachment shatters that certainty. Suddenly, the familiar levers no longer work. At first, she tests the silence internally. She wonders if this is temporary, if you will eventually return to your old patterns. When you do not, frustration builds. The absence of reaction feels unsettling because it removes her ability to influence the emotional direction of the connection. What once felt flexible and responsive now feels immovable. Your calm refusal to engage strips away the emotional feedback loop she relied on, and that absence creates tension she cannot release. This loss of control triggers emotional discomfort because it challenges her sense of agency. The mind prefers situations it can influence, even if that influence is subtle. When your detachment remains consistent, she is forced to accept that she cannot pull you closer, cannot provoke emotion, and cannot redirect the outcome through effort or charm. This realization often manifests as restlessness, irritation, or an urge to reassert influence in some way, but every attempt, even imagined ones, collapses against the reality of your silence. As frustration grows, it begins to transform into longing. Control and desire are often linked. When something is easily accessible, it feels manageable. When access is removed, desire intensifies, not because of neediness, but because uncertainty awakens attention. She begins thinking about you more often, not because she suddenly wants validation, but because the unresolved dynamic occupies her mental space. The unanswered questions, the lack of closure, and the inability to influence the outcome create emotional pressure that seeks release. Your restraint amplifies this effect. You are not cold, aggressive, or dismissive. You're simply unavailable. That distinction matters. It removes justification for anger and leaves her facing herself without a visible opponent. The emotional tension turns inward. She becomes aware of how much emotional reassurance she once received simply by knowing she could reach you. Losing that reassurance exposes vulnerability she didn't realize she had. This awareness also disrupts her self-perception. She may have believed she was emotionally independent, unaffected by distance, or immune to attachment. Your detachment challenges that belief. She realizes that influence does not equal independence, and that control does not equal strength. Being unable to affect you forces her to confront the limits of her emotional authority. That confrontation is deeply uncomfortable but also illuminating. Over time, the emotional breakdown shifts into recognition. She understands that true power in a connection does not come from emotional leverage, but from self-control. Your detachment demonstrates a kind of authority that does not need to assert itself. You did not withdraw to provoke, manipulate, or punish. You withdrew to preserve your integrity. That realization lingers long after the emotional turbulence fades. It is in losing control over you that she finally understands the quiet strength you always carried, a strength that never needed to be proven to be real. As time passes and your detachment remains unwavering, the final stage of her emotional breakdown begins to take shape, not as chaos, but as awareness. This is where everything converges. The confusion, the shock, the regret, the loss of control all funnel into a single realization. She has become fully aware of your true value and the opportunity she failed to protect. This awareness does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, firmly, and with permanence. She begins to understand that what she lost was not just a person, but a rare presence. Your emotional discipline, your consistency, your restraint, and your ability to remain grounded. Were not common traits. They were qualities that brought stability without demand, strength without noise, and support without obligation. While you were present, these qualities felt normal because they were constant. Now, without them, she sees how rare they truly were. The absence has stripped away illusion and revealed substance. This realization reframes her memories. Moments she once dismissed as ordinary now feel meaningful. Your calm during conflict, your silence instead of escalation, your willingness to walk away from chaos, these are no longer seen as passive traits, but as signs of high emotional intelligence. She recognizes that you did not need control, validation, or attention to feel secure. That kind of self-sufficiency is uncommon, and its value only becomes clear when it is gone. At this stage, regret transforms into understanding. She accepts that missed opportunities are not always loud failures. Sometimes they are quiet neglects. She sees that your detachment was not abandonment, but self-respect. That distinction changes everything. It removes blame and replaces it with clarity. She realizes that you did not leave to hurt her. You left because staying would have meant betraying your own standards. That truth is heavy because it means the loss was not inevitable. It was the result of choices. This awareness also alters how she views future connections. You become a reference point, whether she wants it or not. She measures emotional maturity against what you embodied. She becomes more cautious about dismissing consistency as boring, more attentive to stability, and more respectful of boundaries. Your absence teaches lessons that presence never could. Even if she never reaches out, the impact remains embedded in how she thinks, chooses, and values. There is also a quiet grief that accompanies this awareness. Not the grief of heartbreak, but the grief of recognition that comes too late. She understands that some doors close not with noise, but with dignity, and those doors rarely reopen. This realization carries weight because it is irreversible. She cannot unsee your value, and she cannot undo the detachment that revealed it. In the end, your detachment completes its work without confrontation, without explanation, and without revenge. It leaves behind clarity. She understands what she lost, why she lost it, and what it represented. That understanding stays with her, not as punishment, but as truth. It is in this final awareness that your absence becomes permanent, not in distance, but in meaning, because once value is truly seen, it is never forgotten.